Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start, Mr. Speaker, by thanking you for granting permission at what was quite short notice for me to make this personal statement to the Honourable House today. I'd like to start, Mr. Speaker, by thanking the Chief Minister for allowing me the honour and privilege to serve in his administration as Minister for the Treasury over the last 8 months. Over that time, I believe that by working with the new members of the Treasury Board, we have put a social conscience at the heart of Treasury's decision-making, be it the 5-year funding model for the vital community service of the Family Library, which otherwise would have run out of funding in July, the 15% increase in carers allowance for our essential carers, to the cost of living support packages that have looked to support the most vulnerable through the current unprecedented times. I hope that social focus will continue throughout this administration and beyond, and I will be watching closely to ensure that it does. I would like to thank my political colleagues within Treasury for all the support they have given and the great kindness they have shown me over my time in office. I want to make it absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that as far as I'm concerned, at all times I have acted appropriately and within the Government Code and Timber Members Code. But ultimately, under the system of government we have, the Minister is responsible for the department, whether they have been involved in a particular decision-making process or not. When something goes wrong within a department, ultimately it is the Minister who must bear responsibility for that. Also, when a single Minister becomes the centre of continual speculation that is drowning out all the rest of government's important messaging and is potentially seen by some others as a stumbling block to the much needed change that must come, then whether or not that Minister has acted appropriately becomes completely irrelevant. When it comes to public office, Mr. Speaker, no one person or individual is bigger than the office they occupy. When one person becomes the story, it is the responsibility and duty of that person to step aside for the greater good of the office and government as a whole. So that is the primary reason why I decided that the only way for progress to be made and to provide the government the space to bring in the much needed changes the Chief Minister laid out in another place is to resign from government and return to the backbenches. I would like to thank the Chief Minister for agreeing to accept my resignation and for his kind and generous words when we met last Monday and asking me to take some time to reflect on my decision and to allow for the space for a replacement to be considered. But it was clear to me that no amount of reflection was going to change the decision I came to what is now 10 days ago. I would also like to give my sincere thanks and appreciation to all those political colleagues who have contacted me personally over the last week and a half to offer me kind words of support. They know who they are, but will probably never comprehend just how much that has meant to me. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank all of the staff of Treasury for the hard work that they have undertaken, including in many cases going well above and beyond their normal roles. From setting up the support schemes in COVID to dealing with the large increase in queries, they have performed phenomenally. I would in particular like to thank the Social Security Division, which I visited personally to thank a week and a half ago, for all the hard work they have undertaken in setting up and administering firstly that COVID support, but now also the cost of living support packages. All of that alongside doing their day-to-day jobs and also trying to move forward the Social Security Transformation Programme. Every time they must have thought they were getting back to some semblance of normal. It must have seemed we politicians came up with another bright idea to increase their workload. Their efforts have been Herculean in nature and deserve public recognition. I fully welcome the Chief Minister's statement in another place last week in relation to culture and government, Mr. Speaker, and how we need to move forward. It is not just a problem faced with one department or area of government, but something that needs tackling across the whole public sector. But it's also not something new, Mr. Speaker. We've heard it all before. I myself have on several occasions highlighted the issue, both in this Honourable House and another place, and spoke with the cultural challenges. It also came through as a major issue in the Sir Jonathan Michael report, which both myself and the now Chief Minister jointly commissioned. In fact, meriting its own entire section of that report at section 2.4.3. It was always clear that it was not going to be an instant change to change attitudes and behaviours that have been embedded for many years, even dare I say it, decades. But what is fundamentally clear is this needs to be a watershed moment for government as an organisation. The other thing to say on this, Mr. Speaker, is that if people inside or outside this Honourable House think that by changing a few individuals here or there, that will bring about the change required. They are sorely mistaken, Mr. Speaker. As I have previously stated over the last few years in both this House and another place, culture is something that flows through an organisation like a river, running all the way from the top to the ground at every level, and every so often changing a few people at the top does not combat or resolve the issues. We know that, Mr. Speaker, as that approach has been tried many times before, and here we are discussing it again today. And also to reinforce the point, over my 4 years as Minister for Health and Social Care, the entire personnel of the senior management of that department changed, yet still here we are today. One thing that does not help with the challenge of cultural change is the divided nature of the department structure across government. It leads by its very nature to suggest to the public that ministers are all powerful and control every aspect of decision making of their departments, knowing and having approved personally of every decision made, large or small. Sometimes we as politicians don't help by some of us seeming to endorse that same narrative. Those of us who've been ministers know the reality is far from this, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to employment matters, ministers quite rightly must not involve themselves in day-to-day management and employment issues. Many don't realise that one of the first things a minister has to do when taking office is sign a delegation of authority as a bare minimum complying with the terms of page 42 of the Government Code to the CEO of the department to deal with all employment and management related issues. Quite rightly so, in my view, as politicians should be focused on setting and devising policy. Equally, the relationship between a minister and their CEO is essential. Both need to be able to trust each other explicitly, as otherwise, if distrust or the inability to trust the information being provided creeps in, the system becomes dysfunctional. As the HSC itself saw, not all that many years ago, when the relationship between the then Minister and CEO became toxic, to put it mildly, and those of us who were around at the time saw firsthand the consequences of that. But this current department and ministerial setup does give the view to the public that ministers are all powerful and involved in everything, including day-to-day employment matters, when this is simply not the case. If we are going to have one culture across Isle of Man government, Mr. Speaker, then as I have voiced before, I've always held this radical notion. We need one Isle of Man government. That is, for me, one of the most welcome parts of the Chief Minister's statement in another place. You can't, in my view, create and bring about cultural change across an organisation unless that organisation is one entity, not many disparate ones. Over the life of the last Timwood, I had, should we say, the odd disagreement with our former colleague for Douglas East, Mr. Robert Shaw, sometimes quite passionate disagreements. But one thing we always agreed on was the need for what he called one single legal entity and what I refer to as a one government approach. Mr. Robert Shaw lectured us for many years in this Honourable House and in another place on the issues we would face if we didn't take this approach, and he has been, as I feared at the time, proved absolutely right. It was something I agreed with him on in the last administration and something I still believe in now. So if we are going to have cultural change, we also need structural change, as otherwise we end up going around the same circle over and over again. And I'm absolutely delighted that the Chief Minister has grasped that nettle and is pushing this forward as part of the reforms announced in another place last week, as it's only through this it will bring about lasting change. We now come to the part, Mr. Speaker, where I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint some outside this Honourable House. For anyone waiting with bated breath, patiently waiting for the embittered rant of a now former minister or some kind of Geoffrey Howe moment, I'm afraid I must bitterly disappoint them, Mr. Speaker. When a minister leaves office, it always creates a void, allowing an opportunity for political mischief to occur. So for the avoidance of any doubt, Mr. Speaker, I want to make some things absolutely clear. 8 months ago, I sat in this House and supported wholeheartedly the Honourable Member for Ayr and Michael for Chief Minister. I believed he was the right person to lead our nation forward and tackle the major problems that we face. That has not changed, Mr. Speaker, not one iota. I believed he was the right person then, I still believe he is the right person now, and I think he has shown us all again in the last week just why it was the right decision, and he is that right person. He has created a diverse council of ministers with some exceptionally highly intelligent and talented individuals, which I firmly believe has the skills to tackle head-on the major issues of the day, some of which have been building for years. I look forward to supporting the government from the backbenches to deliver the Island Plan, and to make our nation the forward-looking, inclusive, vibrant society that it deserves to be. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, I take the scrutiny role of backbencher to question and challenge seriously. Anyone who was in this Honourable House when I was last a backbencher 5 years ago will most certainly remember that. So while I will be wholeheartedly supporting the government where I believe it is right, it's not a free pass, Mr. Speaker, and I will be as strongly and vocally opposed to decisions and the direction of travel where I believe it's wrong. During my 5 years as a minister, being honest, one thing that has frustrated me, Mr. Speaker, has been juggling the workload and time demands of occupying two different intensive ministerial roles, but trying alongside that to represent the needs of constituents. It can be a difficult balancing act in terms of competition for demands on a member's time, and one I'm sure on more than one occasion I haven't got right. So one of the things I am most looking forward to, Mr. Speaker, is throwing myself fully back into the grassroots level of representing the people of Douglas North. It was wanting to affect change on the ground and affect change in people's lives that brought me into politics in our island in the first place. Before I joined this Honourable House 6 years ago, I spent 8.5 years representing the community of Douglas and Douglas Council. I'm looking forward to once again being able to dedicate much more time and attention to the amazing community of Douglas North. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Chief Minister once again for allowing me to be part of his administration and for the great personal kindness and support he has always shown me. And I wish him and my other former ministerial colleagues well in the challenges that face them. In the future, I have no doubt we will have strong disagreements over certain issues, but it is only through debate, respecting different points of view, and all of us in this Honourable House and another place working together, be we ministers or backbenchers, that we will deliver the real lasting change that those outside this Honourable House who put us here in the first place not just expect, but rightly demand. It also wouldn't be me, Mr. Speaker, if I didn't close with a quote. And who can compare to Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, who, as an aside, served over his career in 3 of the 4 great offices of state, and at one point or another ended up prematurely leaving all 3. So actually thinking about it, maybe he's not actually the best example for me to use. But anyway, the quote I leave this Honourable House with is this: "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well said. Well said.